Good afternoon. So let's. So while they're setting up, so you'll see that it's not only the last presentation; it's also the presentation with the most co-authors. So we've got myself, Henry over there, who's worked in the city of Swanee, but is also an industrial economist. Lavin Naidu, who's I was waiting for you. Who works in GIS. Richard Ballard, who is a geographer. Mamoketi Muadiba, who's a town planner. Darlington Mushangera, who's an economist, and Graham Gotts is a kind of jack of all trades kind of guy. I wanted to take just a minute to focus on that because of what Ivan spoke about earlier. Those three circles of urban economics, geography, town and regional planning. We take that very seriously, and this is serious stuff we're doing. We're looking at manufacturing jobs and jobs more broadly in the Gauteng province. And so we want to have a multidisciplinary team. And that's really maybe the main point of this discussion is to invite colleagues in the room to work with us. We're very happy to make the data available. We're very happy to, and obviously it's not our data, it's the tax data, but we're looking for collaboration, we're looking for ideas around the data. So I thought I'd start there. Realizing that it was a Friday, the presentation is hopefully bright. There's no regressions and there's no tables. That's okay, so. Okay, so the GCRO, you guys know who we are. One thing that I will point out is that we based at the University of Witwatersrand, but that we are a partnership between the University of Johannesburg, Wits University, the Gauteng provincial government, and SALGA. So but we're an independent research organization. So I'm very glad to have met you again, Glenn, today, because I finally found somebody who may have read more public policy documents than our team. So this is just, what do you get? This is a snapshot of, I can't even count. We have like about 800 documents in a repository right now of local government policies related to the economy. It will probably be more. We're still verifying it, and there again, we're going to make it available to people to study this important area called Gauteng. And what the heck's going on in there. Our idea is that hopefully in about 2 years' time, we'd be able to spatialize the data and have something which people are calling an investment atlas. So an atlas which will show where different sets of investments are happening. Why I point this out here is because throughout all of these years, there's an assumption that manufacturing, the growth of manufacturing is going to lead employment within the province. And through that, we're going to have a set of multiplier effects. This one here, the GGT 2030, speaks about it in a very specific way, which is that it brings together 3 policy objectives: transformation, modernization, and reindustrialization. So TMR. I hear this all the time from people in the province, politicians. And the idea is, and it's quite interesting the way it's framed, transformation usually expressed in terms of racial inclusion within the economy. Modernization expressed in terms of greater efficiencies in terms of logistics within the economy, underpinned by reindustrialization, which would drive those 2 other objectives. And obviously, you have to pose the questions. Are there trade-offs between those 3 objectives? Well, how do you rank those 3 objectives, etc.? And the reason why we did this work, and specifically around manufacturing, is because it is the one area where we need to have an evidence-based argument urgently with people in the province, but also within local government. So just to say the way that we frame our work, sort of at a high level thing, is that we're looking at sectors, but we're looking at it in space, and we're trying to grow employment. That's kind of the way we have framed this entire research program. So it leads to some interesting kind of extensions once one gets into the work. So I'll look quickly in terms of the concept and the data that we're focusing on, and specifically around this concept around deindustrialization and premature deindustrialization. So this basically, in terms of Roderick, and I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but basically it's a very stages sort of approach to development. In this phase where you grow the secondary sector of manufacturing, there's a number of important outcomes that happen in terms of firms, in terms of households, right? So that's the observed process in developed countries. When you look at developing countries, something else happens, and Roderick calls this premature deindustrialization, which is kind of the most prominent way that the policy problem is expressed within Gauteng, but I think more broadly within South Africa. And basically, that's where you skip the stage where the secondary sector actually grows, and there can be a couple of different sort of permutations, which I'm not going to go into. So faced with this problem, and fortunately, the data became available, so we were able to then begin to look at it in a bit more detail. I'm not going to go through this, but basically, this is the kind of the policy argument around the multipliers in terms of industrialization. And so what we did is that we took the data and we took it one level lower than local government or metropolitan levels to the planning regions. So each of the metros have planning regions, and we also have the local municipalities within the districts. And it plots this area here. And basically, the green areas are the areas where we're actually seeing job growth. The white, well, you can't really see. It's supposed to be it's supposed to be a pale purple. Are areas where there hasn't been much job losses, but as it gets more purple, there's significantly more job losses. And you'll see this big purple area here, which is Tshwane, specifically the Tshwane CBD. And any difficult questions, not only on this, but the whole presentation, Henry can answer. So this was quite interesting just to spatialize it in this way, because the most obvious thing that emerges is that the workshop of South Africa, Ekurhuleni, the East Rand, has seen significant job losses in the first instance here. Tshwane, we think it might be, and I'm just thinking about aloud, maybe related to some of the work we listened to earlier around relocation of businesses. I should just take a step back. I mean, before we say this here, I mean, Gauteng has lost a lot of manufacturing jobs. So you look at the QLFS, I mean, it's quite clear if you measure that, it's deindustrialization. It's 400,000 jobs between 2008 and 2023. It's not a small amount of job losses. But the reason to do it in this way is that it helps to inform local economic planning. So that was the first cut. That was the first cut of the data. I'll just summarize it. So the areas of decline. This is the steel mill in Van der Belt Park. The areas adjacent to the traditional CBDs, both in Johannesburg and Pretoria, Bronkhorstspruit, is a decline of subsidies into the previous homeland area. Vereniging in Van der Belt Park, which was a bit surprising given the fact that, I mean, you would expect there would be a lot more manufacturing activity in there, but it is significantly declined in parts of Ekurhuleni, right? Okay. The areas that have increased in terms of jobs, we're seeing an agglomeration. Well, we think it's an agglomeration of areas. We still need to do one of the fancy spatial correlation things, but basically Centurion, which is region 4 of Pretoria, the Joburg Midrand, and OR Tambo, which is the area around the airport. Quite a significant concentration of businesses within those areas, manufacturing jobs. There might be some head office effect there, but I think if you drive through the area, it kind of makes sense, like intuitively, if you're driving around, the area. We've also seen the big investments in terms of automotive, both through the national schemes, but also through the Tshwane SEZ, in terms of Rosalind and Silverton. Areas in Tshwane have seen growth in terms of jobs. And then Mogale City and Midvaal, specifically around the R59 corridor. Okay. So this is just a screen grab of a Google map around the R59. This is Meyerton. And you can see, because I mean, I was looking at this data and saying, like, I still need to drive there and speak to the people there and understand the place. But you just pull up this map and you can see there's quite a bit of industrial type activity that's going on. Martin's Concrete, Max Steel, Brighton Bar, Merton. There's also, for some reason, a golf course here on the end, which I found quite interesting. But it is, I mean, it's about understanding these areas in space and understanding those sorts of connections. I need to. Okay. So then what we did is that we said in the classical definition of deindustrialization, two things need to happen, is that you need a reduction in terms of economic growth and you need a reduction in terms of jobs. And so we plotted this just basically looking at percentage changes. The jobs are the CETSA data, the GVA estimates are Quantec. And so that, I mean, that would... What am I doing here? So that would be the quadrant of deindustrialization, and you can see there's a lot of clustering of regions in here that would be sort of classically deindustrialization. There's Merafong over there, and which one is it? I think it's Midrand. There's two in here which both increase in terms of employment and in terms of GVA. The surprising thing is this quadrant over here, where you haven't had GVA growth, but you've had employment growth. Now, this is why we came to this conference, because it's a puzzle that very clever people need to solve in this room. So we have a couple of ideas. Henry's done some fantastic work around how we begin to understand specialization, impacts on jobs, etc. But we're not at a point yet where we have an explanation, and I think we may have multiple explanations going forward. So it is a puzzle, something very interesting that we found. One of, and I'll go through, let me not go through what I think it was. So this is just another way of representing that data. The red areas are areas which have decreased GVA and decreased employment. The green areas are decreased GVA and increased employment, and the blue areas are increased GVA and increased employment. Right, so so you can see. I mean, this area here around Merafong. I mean, it's very small, probably negligible, but it's interesting. What is interesting is that the traditional area of manufacturing in the province, the sort of what is called the workshop of South Africa, Ekurhuleni has seen significant declines on both of those measures. Okay, so I don't know. Is it like? Okay, so this is just a summary sort of data of those four quadrants. Just over 2,400 jobs created when the economy is growing in that area. 23,622,000 jobs here, and of course the big decline across the province. So I mean, overall you can see Gauteng is not doing well in terms of manufacturing, but the minute we get this variegated understanding at a planning region level, we're able to begin to understand the trends a little bit better. Is it like, do I need to like, okay. So understanding the data, earlier on I said I'd speak about an area. So this is literally about 500 meters from my late grandmother's house. It's in Actonville, Benoni, and it's a foundry. What's interesting about this area is that it's a traditionally manufacturing area. We're on the one side of the road. This is a fairly successful company. They do metal castings. And they've been around for a very, very long time, as long as I can remember. In fact, it was started in the 70s and has gone through 3 iterations of owners. You have the sort of the impacts. The little guys selling Chisinyama, I suppose, to. There's a taxi rank and and a tire replacement guy, but in the background here you can also see there's a school in this area here. So I mean, this would probably be one street where kind of deindustrialization is not happening. It seems to be working, and there seems to be connections within this here. The point made earlier, I think also by Glenn, is that the area is very clustered. So there's a couple of foundry type, galvanizing type businesses in that area, and they work together in terms of products. So we're getting to the end of this year, because I know you guys are all on a Friday afternoon and stuff. So I'm not going to go through like the literature in detail, because when you have 7 or 8 authors, each very opinionated, we don't agree, and that's a good thing. The one thing is that how do we deal with this idea of manufacturing as possessing a special characteristic? So it's emphasized even in the academic literature, not just politically, that manufacturing is the only route for South Africa right? So there's a literature there which says it's manufacturing, and there's no other route in terms of getting the stages, going through the stages. So we need manufacturing or nothing else. So the interesting caveat or the corollary of that discussion is that most people don't think of light manufacturing as manufacturing. People think of like smokestacks, like, so it's something that we need to work on in terms of understanding what the full range of activities are in terms of manufacturing. And so the second one, which was mentioned yesterday, I'm not sure who spoke about social polarization and occupational structure. Very interesting set of literature. We've been looking through Owen Crenshaw's work in Johannesburg, and he finds that deindustrialization coincides not with social polarization, but rather with the growth of middle range jobs, and combined with mass unemployment. Yeah, I'll be done. Right. The third sort of literature, which is something we've just started to begin to read collectively, is around geographic political economy, and Andy Pike speaks about a conceptualization of capitalism as a particular social, economic, political formation, and its geography is the outcome of contradictory social, political, cultural, biophysical relation processes. It's complicated. No, and it is complicated. So our approach going into this year is that, and for sure, thank you so much for the invitation once again, was to open up this discussion, and hopefully it spurs people to say, there's a couple of puzzles in this data. Can you then begin to look at it and put your own mind into this? And we're very happy to work collaboratively with this, or we're very happy to work on your own in terms of this. So this is where we are, and I'll go through this here. The first thing is in terms of government's role. Our government initiatives supporting the manufacturing sector. Like I said, we've got this big database of documents. We're busy putting it online, and you guys can use the AI methodology to look through it. We've started to read it in a more sort of old-fashioned way, but it's clearly going to be impossible to get through all of these documents in that way. Second question is quite important, is in terms of the wherewithal, I pronounced it correctly. Does government have the wherewithal to actually deal with implementation? And so Gauteng has a very particular sort of institutional arrangement around the economy. So you have the Department of Economic Development, and you have a range. You have the Gauteng Growth and Development Agency, which is an entity of the department, and then that in turn has a series of entities. It's really complicated. Whether the institutional mechanism works is another issue. The second area is around firm responses, and this is where Henry has done some really exceptional work. Thank you, Henry. Looking at specialization, so we've looked at local quotients, and we want to take the subsector, begin to look at the subsector. So does the data show us that firms are more specializing, and that's why perhaps they're able to keep on to workers in particular areas, or are firms simply just reducing employment? But this will be soon, and I think you're going to present it in a month's time at the Public Sector Economists Forum. So yeah, so go to the Public Sector Economists Forum, and it will be there. And then the third, whoops, let me just go back. And then the third one, are we just basically seeing in the data the rise of smaller firms, which might explain the peculiarity of no economic growth, but some level of jobs being sustained and growing within these areas? So that's it for us. There's my details. Very happy to chat. And yeah, thank you so much once again for the opportunity to present here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ebrahim. That was great. I imagine we have some good time for some questions, and I think
Henrik, you wanna?
Ivan, I imagine your work kind of speaks to this already. So maybe I'll hand over to some further questions from the group.
Ebrahim, thank you. Could you please go back to your puzzle slide?
Oh, sorry. That one.
Yeah, so let me just get some clarity. Change in GVA then here only refers to manufacturing or total GVA?
No, it's manufacturing. It's manufacturing GBA.
And then employment also only within manufacturing?
Manufacturing, yes.
And but where does the employment data come from?
It's the CERSA data.
So it's formal employment?
Yes.
Oh yeah, okay, then that is quite the puzzle.
Okay. So I should have slowed down and just explained this. It's all manufacturing data, and also the sizes of these bubbles indicates the total size of employment there. But in the paper, there's the full list of stuff.
I think what will be beneficial in future is when the SARS NT data, or when they are able to derive output. Because GVA, whether it's Regional Explorer or Quantec, none of us really know how they derive the output. So I think eventually when we are actually able to couple SARS employment, formal employment with SARS output, then this picture might change quite dramatically. So maybe you shouldn't spend too much time wondering about it.
Sure. And did you want to?
So just on this, what it provides to us is just that contrary picture of what we expected to see, right? So it gives us a starting point, but further to this, this kind of opened our eyes to the aspect that something else is also required, right? And it comes to the argument that businesses, while they are profit maximizing and their motivation is profit, right? The decisions aren't purely on the profit motivation. The decisions are sometimes behind that longevity, sustainability. There might be other governmental factors that drive employment for reasons. That could possibly be why we're seeing the upward trend there. There could be grant support in there. So this is kind of where the thought pattern came from, to say, okay, but this doesn't make sense, and there might be more data out there that'll help us to make sense of this. But let's try and look behind the curtain. That's basically where this.
Have you played around with the Google Earth Engine nightlight data?
Not yet. It is something we are going to be doing.
Okay.
I can just say, Henry is interested in doing that work, but we do have a recent, there's a couple of outputs for nightlight data estimating GVA in the province that the GCRO has done. It's on the website. And more or less it correlates with this here. But you're right, it would probably be, maybe we need to deepen the analysis in that way. That's actually a really good, a good suggestion around verifying this thing.
Yeah, at the end of the day, it's actually all about augmentation. Okay, eventually the SARS data set might be the gold data set, so then we don't need anything else. But at this stage, it's about adding on and augmenting. So I think it might just help this to make slightly more sense.
Thank you, and I really enjoyed the paper and the map of the month. I recall going to that Ekurhuleni workshop of the country with Simon Roberts, and we saw a whole lot of churches being launched in these old factory units. So he called it the worship of of South Africa. But one of the things that struck me with people using this tax data is I went to a workshop in eThekwini, and they only presented the, as you did, the change data. And they didn't present the absolutes of where significant concentrations of employment were in year A and then again in year B. And I think that's, what that resulted in is them thinking that automatically these areas that are showing the most dynamism in terms of new job creation deserve, a particular lot of attention, versus thinking about, well, where are these huge concentrations of existing employment that might be shedding over time, but still disproportionately hold very significant amounts of employment. And I know you haven't done that because the paper talks to both of those dynamics, but it was just struck me that other people make that mistake of thinking the change might be from 0 to 2, and that's a very, very significant change, but in across the totality of employment, maybe not so important.
Thank you very much. Enjoyed the presentation. In my mind, it raises a lot of further questions, some of which have already been mentioned, but in no particular order. I think the first thing I would encourage you to do is to try and unpack it by subsector of manufacturing. And hopefully the GVA data is available for subsectors too, because that will be, I mean, this is very, very suspicious, and I wouldn't touch the Quantec or Global Insight data, to be honest. So if the subsector data confirms spurious relationships, I mean, it would confirm that this data is not worth putting on a slide, right? Because it's a total distraction. So some questions by unpacking a bit further is where are the sources of decline, the biggest decline? Is there, for example, older industries are showing the significant decline, whereas newer industries like mining, like pharmaceuticals or technology-based sectors are showing some growth. Is there outsourcing going on? So part of the reason for deindustrialization around the world, right, is not actual decline in output, but manufacturing firms outsourcing service-type functions from high-end design, accounting, human resources to catering, security, and logistics and that kind of thing, right? So that's also worth exploring. I think you should also put Gauteng in a national context. I mean, I was talking to Ebrahim before. GCRO, I love them, but they narrowly focus on Gauteng, and there is a wider country which, if the pattern is exactly the same, that's really important. If Gauteng is declining faster than the rest of the country, that's really important as well, right? So that's a very, very significant thing to be doing, it seems to me. There's also more of a historical perspective. So there is GDP data from Stats SA going back to, the 90s. And it would be good to know whether we've seen a real step change in what's in the trajectory in the last decade or so, right, from the previous. Because our analysis showed that Gauteng was doing pretty well until 2018. So it's really important to have a sense of that. And then also just a simple thing like the scale of that job loss compared with what proportion of jobs have been lost, right? So Joburg, I think that you could make more of that. It's a very, very significant decline for Johannesburg, right? It's much more significant than Ekurhuleni, right? Came to Park. So the maps and all that are kind of oversimplifying, and I think that richness will lose a little bit with some of the way you've presented it. But anyway, I really enjoyed it. Well done. Thank you.
So, do you want me to go? Yeah, I mean, Glenn, your point is well taken. I mean, so we've got the size of the bubbles is the employment. I mean, we should say that. The data here is I think it's 5 or 6 of the biggest districts in South Africa are still in Gauteng. Gauteng still leads in terms of manufacturing overall. And I take the point. And in terms of presentation, it's important to do that. I should say that when we started, one of the most interesting things we did, and this is before we started using the CESA data, was to look at the QLFS data. And the initial presentations were, kind of nationally focused on it. And perhaps what we've done is that we've perhaps focused too much in terms of Gauteng, and it needs a broader focus. Totally agree. In terms of the data, Henry, you can deal with some of it. I'll deal with some of it. This will you want to do.
Okay. Just to touch on the richness that you've mentioned in terms of subsectors. So the follow-up work on this actually looks at the subsectors of manufacturing itself. So let's take, for example, the food and beverage industry per planning region. The reason why it's not presented in this paper is due to the fact of what you've just mentioned. I've picked up some spurious elements. It also comes to what Glenn has said, is like if you have a base of 1,000, you suddenly go to 2,000, right? You suddenly see a 100% increase in employment. One of the ways we've worked around that to some extent is trying to look at the central tendency by using geometric mean rather than arithmetic mean over the time period to try and understand what is the actual central tendency of the data. Yes, I would love to get away from Contact and I would love to get away from IHS. But until we can get people on board to say, cool, we can support your methodology for taking the provincial GDP figures and breaking them down specifically by the sectors, utilizing SIC codes and getting behind the screen of how all of that information is collected. Unfortunately, we still sit on the outside to some extent. We have to use the data that we have. And I think part of this was a proof of concept, right? Because if this works for the manufacturing industry, right, with some adjustment, why wouldn't it work for another industry, right? So we are trying to see if we can look at the story. And another thing that you mentioned rather interestingly is we are trying to see if there's movement across the planning regions within an industry. So simply put, and I'm going to touch something here specifically, is you saw it in the region 3 on the city of Tshwane, that there's a big job loss, right? And it's that of the aging of the industrial area of region 3, and more specifically the heavy industry that was there that relied on the provision of the Pretoria West Power Station, right? And as soon as problems came in there, those industries said, right, we cannot operate here anymore, let's go, right? And that then kind of did a trickle or knockdown effect of further degradation of that industrial area. Now the question then remains is how do you revitalize something like that? So the idea with this is to try and understand what is happening. Are we just seeing a movement of people from A to B, and could it be as a result? One of the other arguments that we have also is the collapse of the railway networks. So might you see that people are moving towards closer to the arterial road networks to gain access? So there's a lot of things we have to think about. But yeah, we are considering that. Thanks.
I mean, if I can just add on to this here. So in parallel to this, we're doing a series of more traditional sector studies, which begins to look at each of this, we're doing 7 of them. And they have, I mean, they're fairly interesting. I mean, for instance, in terms of manufacturing, we have a paper around agro processing, which the authors argue, I mean, it's a significant area for growth within the Gauteng province. Funnily enough, in Tshwane, I haven't shown you the paper yet, but in Tshwane and in the Westland. So, I mean, the data that we have is also being supplemented by interviews with business, government, etc., as well as sector level data that's buried within policy documents, etc. So we're hoping that over time we're able to get quite a good picture of what's going on in terms of manufacturing. Yeah, so I think we take the data issues seriously. I think we take the issue that I mean, Gauteng is not an island. It's absolutely critical. I mean, I was speaking to you yesterday about the linkages, for instance, that we need to the ports in, for instance, the ports in Durban, or the fact that the province wants to build a railway going into Limpopo, etc. So, I mean, and those are definitely things that we need to factor into this discussion. Yeah, I think I'll end it there.
Okay.